Welcome to Islington Mill and a brand new monthly podcast series from the people who brought you Islington Mill is Queer. My name is Niall, aka The Nihilist, and I will be your host for the next hour. Islington Mill is one of the UK's most beloved arts institutions, a community-focused and artist-led space in Greater Manchester, Salford, that over the last 20 years has variously been a gallery, a live music venue, a nightclub, a studio complex, a bed and breakfast, an office furniture supply store, and of course, originally, a Victorian cotton mill. Well known in the north of England and beyond for its artistic residencies, gallery shows, screenings, and live music and community-based events, the last few years have seen some significant changes to Islington Mill, both physically and in its remit. Originally a ramshackle DIY space, in the last few years Islington Mill has benefited from an injection of European arts funding to help renovate the building itself and to expand the organisation's curatorial scope. Always a space where different communities could come together to collaborate, Islington Mill is currently entering into a new phase of its existence, and I and many other people are very keen to find out what exactly that future holds. After a successful run of 10 episodes of Islington Mill is Queer, we have decided to open up the remit of an Islington Mill-based monthly podcast to cover more areas than just queerness and sexuality, though bear in mind that these topics are always going to be integral to the mill and its surrounding culture. But there is a lot more that's also worthy of discussion when it comes to the place and the people who live and work here. From art and communication, politics, philosophy, regeneration, sexuality, psychology, all the way to the topic of today's show, which is community. For the inaugural edition of Islington Mill and I sat down with Bill Campbell, the man who founded and co-owns Islington Mill, to talk about the space, its future, and the community surrounding that future. For this inaugural edition, I asked Bill to supply the theme for today's show, and he was kind enough to share with me details of the project that he is currently embarking on, which sets out his vision for the future of Islington Mill. So, welcome again to episode number 1 of Islington Mill and, where I, the Nihilist, speak to Islington Mill's own Bill Campbell about modelling queer utopias. Bill Campbell, welcome to episode 1 of Islington Mill and, our new Islington Mill podcast. These podcasts are going to be a bit different from the Islington Mill is Queer podcast by the fact that they're going to be themed, it seems. Bill, would you tell us what the theme you have chosen for our first Islington Mill and podcast is?
Yeah, hi Niall.
Hi Bill.
I'd like to talk about a project that I'm about to embark on called Modelling Queer Utopias.
Modelling Queer Utopias. Okay, What does that mean?
Well, just to look at the title, modelling is like trying them out, putting them on for size, demonstrating perhaps. Utopias is maybe like looking at ideal ways of living and being, and I deliberately put the S on the end. So it's not, because sometimes people can perceive utopia as a fixed idea of some unrealistic, perfect way of living, and I don't mean it in that sense. I mean like exploring how we could live better, how we could move towards that. Okay. As a way of how I'd like to lead my life.
Sure. Do you feel that the term itself, utopia, is it's loaded? I think. Do you think? Would you agree with that?
I would, and other people have mentioned that. And this is essentially just a working title, really. It may change because this is a year-long project that I'm about to embark on, exploring that. So it might be that another word comes up that's more appropriate. Okay. So it's not a fixed thing, but it is kind of that idea of, exploring, the queer element is, for me, I identify as queer. For me, what that means is, being willing and ready and able to explore other ways of doing things that aren't necessarily the subscribed normative societal ways.
Okay.
And so, I could be described as a gay man, but I prefer queer because there's certain other deviations from what that might be perceived at that I feel like I am interested in, move towards, would rather inhabit. So putting all of that together, it's like, how as queer people can we explore a way of life we'd like to, that is more comfortable to us, safer to us, appropriate perhaps not appropriate. Yeah. Learn from that and move towards something that is more satisfying in some way, and try stuff out for size.
Okay. Right. For context then, for the listeners, you are the owner and founder of Islington Mill.
Yes.
And actually, if people want to know a more detailed history of how that came to be, it's in one of the episodes of Islington Mill is Queer. You give a very thorough run-through of how you came to find Islington Mill and how you came to buy it and start the how would you describe it? Cooperative, community, collective?
I mean, technically we're a community interest company that manages a building, but we like to try and be as kind of non-hierarchical and as cooperative as possible. But, that's not always... There's a lot more we could do with that, so I wouldn't want to call it a cooperative yet. Okay. So how does your vision or your possible ideas for a queer utopia fit with specifically Islington Mill? Well, I won't go over the history as you mentioned in detail, but some elements of the history was like, I grew up in North Manchester as a bullied queer person and wanted, was sent out into the world, or told I had to go out into the world and sustain myself and be a person, and I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know where I fitted in. So I was very intrigued by, this is the mid-80s, I was very intrigued by Michael Clarke and Lee Bowery and reading, ID magazine, and it seemed to present an idea of queer life that looked very appealing in clubland, where things were kind of challenged, and I thought a route to that might be through fashion design. So off I trotted to do fashion and came out totally unemployable, or feeling that way, and came back to Manchester and thought, well, how am I going to sustain myself in this way that fits me when I don't feel like I fit?
Yeah.
So Islington Mill just appeared as a way to potentially do that, and that's what I committed to. And over the subsequent 20 years, from the late 90s to now, I've been exploring and adding things to the mix of the mill. So we have studios, so I always wanted to be in community. We're an artist space, I always wanted to be creative. Things around that we need in terms of an ecology to make those things work. We set up a club, so we brought that kind of clubbing, club kid element that I'd been interested in into it. But I got waylaid from my own practice, so I stopped doing fashion because I was writing business plans and funding bids and building bits of building. So we're now getting to a point 20 years later where we raised some money, a load of work's been done on the building, the scaffolding's up currently, and we're about to convert the top floor of the building that's never been used into a residency space, an artist residency space. And I'm hoping that in this first year through this project I can kind of run that as a collaborative project led around this theme of modelling queer utopias, where we can develop conversations, club nights, film screenings, yoga classes, whatever it might be, to explore this theme in its widest sense. So for me it might be about finally getting to why I bought Islington Mill.
Okay.
Because I didn't buy it to be an art centre manager. I didn't buy it to be a property developer. I didn't buy it to... I bought it to be a queer artist type person living in amongst people.
I would ask... I could do this, but I would like this to come from you. So Islington Mill used to have a music venue here.
Yeah.
So I think up until, was it 2017 that changed? Up until 2017, quite a lot of people from the Manchester Salford area, quite a good idea of what Islington Mill is, because they've been here to gigs and club nights, etc. It's now we're in 2022. That was 5 years ago that ended. Would you tell the listeners perhaps how Islington Mill has changed in those interim 5 years where they might not have been to this space?
Well, I guess kind of when we set up the venue, it came out of a very DIY spirit of just having parties. So it just came as, private, in effect, parties. It's
just interject to say that all this history is covered in the Islington Mill is Queer podcast. So if people want to know it in detail, they can go back and find out.
Yeah. And we gradually legitimised ourselves. We got a licence and we became a formal thing. But within that, we always wanted to make sure when we got a licence, for example, we had a 24-hour licence, because we were never very good at ending a night. we never knew when to stop. And maybe that's part of the freedom that might be part of Queer Utopia.
Okay.
And, again, I was there wanting to be at the party, not run the event. So I never had an ambition to be a promoter or a performer. I just wanted to be in the environment. That came to an end in 2015, 16, 17, partly because while fundraising, we'd handed the venue over to Emma and Vez. Emma's also contributed to this podcast.
Yes, she has.
So there's more details of Emma's amazing contributions there. But that was always on a 2-year residency to see how they felt running a venue, like the whole thing, not just being a promoter. And we were also fundraising where we knew we were going to do this build and that it probably wouldn't be a good idea to have 200 off their faces people running around a building site. And we thought it was going to happen in 2018, 2019, 2020. And then for various reasons, too boring to go into, that didn't happen. And then COVID. And so that's kind of why what looked like it was going to be a 2 or 3 year hiatus has become a 5-year hiatus.
Could you tell us where we're at now with those developments?
Well, scaffolding up on the building with netting that says queer all over it.
Yeah, it's the most visual thing, I think, the people who can see the building can see.
And I think kind of that's there. I literally put that on there in the weekend before the netting was going to go up there because I wanted the local community to know more about who we are and what was being built. Because I think when people see scaffolding go up on an old mill building, they assume it's going to be flats. Yeah, very true. So we put, building artist spaces and community resources, queer, DIY, stuff all over the building to kind of reassure and hopefully inspire what's coming next. That went up a year ago. It's due to come down in the next month or two. I've been up there this week. The walls have started to go in. It's still very raw, but beginning to see what that space will actually look like. It's due to finish in June, July. So we'll be handed over a white box, probably. And the year is about transforming that from a white box, like literally, physically, the environment. Okay. Painting walls, putting art there, making art, arranging sofas, recovering sofas with art-made textiles that may or may not have something to say about queer utopia or just stimulating stuff. I don't know. And start to do events. Start to bring, almost go back to our roots, just do some house parties. We're not setting up a club because it's a residency space. Yes. But it has been designed to have the potential to have a 200-person event in there. Okay. But it will be people's home. Yeah. So how are those people going to live in and around each other? How do people come? How do people go? What do people do while they're there? How do we kind of maintain that it's a community hub? Things that, people beyond those people that live there, how they can come in and out, what they can experience while there, and hopefully throw some amazing parties. So when you say that this is the start of a project and you're talking about the first 12 months, that will start when the 5th floor is finished and open? So it'll start when we get the keys, which we think June, July. And I'm going to lead this first year. We grappled with that, and we can talk about that grappling a bit, but that come out of I've got the 20 years of experience and this vision. And partly from a selfish artist point of view, it's having got this far, I want to fucking enjoy it for a bit. Yeah, sure. I feel kind of justified in that. Yeah, if you've done the lion's share of the work, you're entitled to that. Yeah, and it is about inviting other people to be involved and setting up how other people can be involved, which can then change. But it's just putting the groundwork and that infrastructure. So we'll have a physical infrastructure, but what's the programming infrastructure? How do you run a night for 200 people in there without pissing everybody off and trashing the place?
So can you go through some of that with me now? Then?
Yeah. What's the that?
How it will run, like what you're envisaging to put in place in those first 12 months. What you would like to see from that space, and also how you think you can manage getting to that.
Okay, well, we kind of identified what we're calling 5 broad brush elements of what might be ways of living, or things to think about when living as individuals and as informal groups. They are food, because we have to eat every day. And that could also be, where food comes from, or cooking food, growing food, hosting dinners or not, or, eating alone. It could be any kind of art type experiment in that. When I deconstructed it, I realised I personally have quite a lot of anxiety about food. We've done potluck dinners here at the mill often. Some people come, some people don't, some people love it. I find them quite difficult. I get nervous about it. Can I cook the appropriate amount? Is it going to be tasty? Am I eating too much, too little? I have a whole, when I really of course I tend to be able to go. I don't have a nervous breakdown, but I find it really difficult on a kind of micro anxiety level. So when I was drinking, I'd go to those and find that I would drink loads.
Yeah.
But as we've also discussed in other podcasts, I now no longer drink. So I'm actively looking at how to make those situations where there's potential bits of anxiety that aren't necessarily direct triggers but are just not helpful. What can we do collectively to explore that? And food is fundamental. We do need it most days. Sleep is also fundamental. We call it sleep, but that could be work-life balance. It could be rest. It could be meditation. It could be how to organise your day. It could be anything that allows you to be productive and not productive.
For want of a better word, wellness.
Yeah, I guess it starts to come into that area. But us as artists are not often, we're pushed and pulled, and we've got a job, and we've got a creative exploration, and we've got collaborators that are really stimulating and also really annoying. So it's like, do we get more annoyed if we've not slept well? So can we manage the creative hedonistic life that we might want part of the time? And as an addict, how can I do that? And I noticed now I'm an addict that I can stay up. Now I'm an acknowledged addict and in sobriety, that I can stay up, but I get as much of a hangover from being tired. Just from having stayed up till 5 a.m. So it's like, God, I never noticed that it might have just been sleep deprivation rather than all this other stuff I'd consumed. So, this is led by me to some extent because I've learned a lot through that recovery process, but it's also acknowledging what an artist-led ecology can be like, and to just, let's look at wellness, but from a queer and artist point of view, and translate that into things that work on a day-to-day basis.
One of the interesting things for me thinking about that, what you've just been talking about, is the transition, I think, for a lot of artists, whereby, especially if you're like not necessarily a quote-unquote trained artist, or you've not been for a third level education training in your particular discipline, like myself with music, is like you have a job to pay the bills, and then you have your interest, which is what you are passionate about, and the reason you are paying bills to maintain your ability to follow your passion. But then when those two things become integrated, and if you're lucky enough to be able to actually have a job that is your passion, is suddenly you find yourself with like spare time and free time. And usually, say 10 years ago, I would have been using my free time to follow my artistic passions and either write or make music or do something that was in some way feeding those passions. But once you come to a point where thankfully your passions are beginning to pay the bills that you used to have to get jobs to pay, how do you restructure your life and feel, not feel a sense of guilt for having free time and self-care, for want of a better word, for wellness time, because we do spend so much of our time as artists in what is already a very difficult economy, but trying to make your passions become what is actually providing your living for you. So I think that's quite an interesting topic actually for artists to acknowledge, especially artists who may have to have a 9-to-5 or some kind of mainstream job that isn't their passion to fund their passion, is how to get a correct life balance. Because when you're working a job and you are a passionate artist, you tend to just spend all your spare time on your art. And if you don't do that, there's this like residual feeling of guilt, which isn't real, I don't think. Like, I don't think that guilt is a real thing anyway. I think that's something that's imposed on us from outside. But that's very interesting what you were saying about like sleep, stroke, wellness, stroke, self-care. I think that's quite important for artists as well.
Yeah, I think it is, because we are working with very tight resources, whether that's space, whether that's time, and of course money. And, you know, and in this country we don't have access to, you know, therapies and stuff like that. So I have had the privilege of being able to get good therapy that's helped me through my recovery. So part of this is kind of placing some of what I've learned into a space and seeing what helps other people as just part of the infrastructure, just like having a building with a fixed roof that we don't, you know, that functions, you know, get some of those basics right, so that those that are in it can live as well as possible and do as much as they want to, guilt-free, and do nothing if they don't want to. You know, because doing nothing is important. It also reminded me, like, you know, I'll probably end up with loads of these things that I've picked up along the way, but what you were describing there about how things you're passionate about, things you're paid for. I came across a Japanese concept called ikigai, which sometimes if you Google it appears as like a 4-way Venn diagram, 4 circles all interlocked.
Okay.
I'm not going to remember it all, but one is like, you know, what you're paid for, what you're passionate about, what the world needs, and what you're good at, maybe. And that when they all intersect, the Japanese call that ikigai, like kind of, I don't think it has a direct translation, but it's kind of meaning of life or something like that. It's like if you can get that balance of being paid for what you're passionate about and the world enjoys it and you're good at it. That's like a sweet spot.
That's the dream that all
dream.
artists strive for. I think. That's interesting. What's it called?
I'm probably saying it wrong. Ikigai, I think it's pronounced. IKIGAI.
Okay, cool. I can put a note to that in show notes, or a link to something that describes that, because that's very interesting. Moving on then, we've had food, sleep, stroke, self-care.
So yeah, the third one, I mean, they're not in any order, but sex.
Okay.
But that's broad headline term. Some people are uncomfortable with that term. We might mean connection, identity, gender. Connection, I think, is the, you know, the important one for me, because again, as an addict, someone which should have the reference point, the TED talk about the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection, in that often addicts are seeking out a form of connection and don't know how to reach it. Okay, that makes sense. And I noticed that when I first heard that, I thought, I'm surrounded by people in this building and I love them all and it's great, but there's something. And so, you know, spent a lot of time talking about shame, and we've done a conversation about that in the past as well. But it's like, what's this connection thing? And I think it's like kind of a sense of safety, a sense of meaningful connections. That could be intimacy and, you know, how we feel like we belong. You know, what are the signifiers that tell us that? What would we like more of that we might not feel able to ask for? And then we turn to drink or drugs or other things in order to kind of, one, quiet that anxiety of like, I'm feeling quite unloved, and sometimes then picking up the Dutch courage to have more intimate hugs with your mates. Well, again, how can you do that, you know, with consent and all those appropriatenesses and without all the trappings, and work on that actively? And understand what that means for different people, because everyone will have a different sense. And I really noticed it in terms of addiction, because when I've successfully dealt with alcohol, but I've slipped back into smoking, and I noticed exactly when that happened, and it's when there was a conflict. And as a result of that conflict, I didn't feel like I could even smile or relate to the two people that were having the main conflict, because I felt I might be seen as taking sides in this kind of cloud, and therefore I wasn't able to connect.
Yeah.
And my instinct was to run away.
Yeah.
And I'd had this pattern as I was in active addiction that I'd run away, get on the train, and I'd buy booze. So I ran away, bought tobacco, went home, and was back in my pattern. And it's like, that's connection. You notice it when you don't have it, or it's switched off from you because there's a conflict going on that says don't have connection now. It's dangerous to have connection. Suddenly I felt like I began to understand that connection's not just being around people, but meaningful connection is where you feel trust, safety, therefore perhaps ability to have intimacy, and whether that's just deep conversation or whether that's touch or sex, or just ability to be oneself in front of other people, like how you choose to dress. You might censor in other areas, so it's where you can be uncensored.
Yeah, cool.
To me. So again, if we're going to live in community, having the ability to express our desires and needs and to not feel shame about them, and to present our identities, our sexuality, our needs for connection openly, is something I'd like to explore, because I think it could be. I think in the queer community and the gay community we can have issues around that.
Yes, I think we have the benefit of being able to draw our own rules around that. Yeah. Because our versions of those things are outside heteronormativity and patriarchy and cissexism and all that stuff. But at the same time, because it's such uncharted territory as well, we could do with some guidance.
Absolutely.
In that. Yeah.
Yeah, and some frameworks and supports to make sure no one's damaged in these delicate areas. Because they are delicate areas. It's quite deep stuff. But it can also be quite simple stuff, because it can just be, a basic consent. Can I hold your hand? Yeah. No. Yeah. But connection might be as simple as that.
Yeah. Cool.
And I think, just in terms of, queerness, I think we are willing, because you say, because we can invent, and we have to invent to some degree our own ways of being. And therefore, I think it's progressive, or has the potential to be. And therefore, in terms of Ikagai, what the world needs, I do believe the world needs new ways of connecting and forming relationships, and we as queers experiment with that quite well, generally. So, how can we do it safely, appropriately, and model that for other people? I have conversations with people who are not in the queer world, and I can, see that the normativity is containing them as well.
Yes, absolutely.
We're all contained by the patriarchy and
the
toxic masculinity and all the various factors that have created this.
What's number 4 then?
Well, let me remember. Communication.
Okay, yeah.
I think crucial.
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, I don't always do it well. It can get difficult when stakes are high.
That to me is very tied into intimacy, like sex stroke, intimacy stroke, communication. I know it definitely does deserve its own box. It's its own very, very important topic. But to me, the best sex, connection, intimacy, all those things come from healthy communication as well. Just let you spark up. Just for the listeners to know, this is a very ASMR type podcast today, because we've got a new microphone. This is very strong, so it's picking up all the little things that we wouldn't normally get, like sparking up a cigarette or shuffling our feet on the floor. But so communication, what falls under that bracket?
Well, I think on a day-to-day basis, it would be how the people in that residency space are able to communicate with each other. And, we around here, I don't know if you've met Rivka, Ruben.
Not officially yet, actually. I'd like to get her on the podcast at some point too.
Yeah, well, Rivka could explain this very in depth and tell you the roots of it all and everything. But Rivka's kind of developed, borrowing from various other sources, a sense, what she calls upwarding. And it's exploring some of those very simple things where our language might often be a cause of conflict. How we choose to give feedback to someone or ask for what we want.
Yeah.
How we can do that in a way that's not going to immediately create a rise in the person receiving that information, might avoid conflict.
Yeah.
And enable us to meet our desires and needs and wants. And how to just, change the way we approach life as choices. So, I have to do this right now, or you should do this. Or how we give advice. You know what you should do?
Yeah. Yeah.
Often can be like, well, fuck you.
Yeah.
Because it has a kind of sense of belittling, a sense of someone else knows more than you, and I don't know what's right for you. What you could do might be this, if I've got an idea, but it's your choice.
Yeah.
Whether you do it or not.
Yeah. What works for me is that kind of like reframing, I know exactly what you mean. This is actually something that's come up in my own life quite recently as well. It's very interesting to hear you talk about it now. Because, of course, one of the major parts of communication, especially if it's going to be in a living scenario, is like critique. Because we're not, we're not always going to be super happy and positive and wanting to communicate good things to each other. Sometimes we're going to have to communicate negative things to each other as well. And it's about I'd imagine it must be about creating the safety within a space to know that can be done in a kind of more loving way, where the context of it is not ostracizing somebody from the community. It's to make the community as a whole itself stronger. Yeah.
I mean, that's the aim, to create resilience, safety, collaboration, therefore.
Yeah.
As opposed to competition or one-upmanship, or control. How to create, it's like that. I'm not from a theatre background, but I think in improvised theatre, it's that and rather than but.
Which is why we have decided to call this podcast "And."
It is, yes,
because it's written on the outside of on the scaffolding that you mentioned earlier. But also, you might as well say this. You described it to me before the microphone was rolling, but
well, it's that thing of like when having a conversation and someone says "but." It's like, I don't care what you've said.
Yeah.
Or you could do that, but I think this is better. It kind of dismisses what you've said.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's like, oh, and we could do this as well.
Yeah.
It's allowing what you stated to be on equal terms and therefore a choice.
Yeah.
So,
but in and of itself is a pejorative term, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's refuting what's come before, whereas "and" is more positive or more neutral, at least. Anyway.
Yeah, and it's I think why it's a great tool for collaboration. It's because we need to be able to say, oh, and we could do this, and be excited about it, and not feel like someone's just telling me what to do.
Yeah, yeah.
Because the collaboration ideally is about developing new things.
Yeah.
So it's like allowing that. Oh, and we could do that, and we could do that, and we could do this, and what else could we do? What would we really love to do?
But we don't have all the time in the world. Okay, so let's move on to the fifth and final topic. What's that?
Practice, and we sometimes say playful practice.
Okay.
We're an artist studio building.
Yeah.
Many people have a practice in art, but it could be a yoga practice, a meditation practice if we're in the wellness thing, or it could be, how we practice self-care. But how we go about doing things, exploring these things playfully.
Okay.
And how we actually get things done. So again, it could kind of cross over into work-life balance, like how we could order things in our lives, in our creative lives. How we can make that as in flow as possible.
Yeah.
Moving from one thing to another.
Yeah.
We'll always have kind of, loopy moments where we get stuck in kind of certain ways of thinking and stuff, but how we can use play or how we can explore how other people develop their artwork or their lives and learn from that to move practice forward. And again, to demonstrate it.
Okay. That seems like, even though that's the last one, that seems like, in a way, kind of the biggest one, because I feel like that will touch on all of the others, encompass them all, in a way. And that's interesting, because I feel like that is, even though it is a factor in the first four, I feel like that is something that would only really come into its own once the first four are a bit more developed, or a bit more, you have ideas to put in place about the first four, then you would think about it's more like a context thing, I think.
Yeah.
It's like presumably everybody who's going to be living there is going to be an artist in some form or other. So the context of what that is I don't know, is that correct, or do you want to refute that?
Well, I would refute that everyone's going to be an artist. 'Cause
Okay.
not necessarily. There could be a philosopher or a academic or whatever else, and the context would be different between an academic and an artist.
Yeah.
But an academic's practice might be how they research, how they read, how they absorb information, and then how they write it up, or whatever it is that they do.
Yeah. Okay.
And practice is we're practicing living. We do it every day, just like if you were practicing the piano, you might do it every day. And hope to improve, hope to kind of experiment, hope to make mistakes and learn from them.
Yeah.
And hope to kind of practice doing it better, having learned those.
That clarifies that for me, actually. Once you frame it as practice, I think maybe what I was trying to articulate there about the context thing is when you said the word playfulness, which relates to everyone's practice, but it's the different practices and how to mesh them all together in a way that suits everyone who's living there.
Yeah, well, we're not trying to suit everyone that's living there, but we're trying to accommodate, create the conditions where whatever people's approach is can be accommodated as healthily as possible.
Okay.
I.e. not someone else's needs not conflicting with someone else's, and so how you can communicate around that. Perhaps frame it in your practice. I do need to practice the piano at some point most days. When works for you?
Music.
Yeah.
Stuff that can't be contained to a singular space, like art. Like art can be contained to a singular space, like you draw or you paint in your room. But music is going to leave your room and go into the other rooms. Yeah. Because it's a waveform that travels through space.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And, you might prefer to do that in the middle of the night. So how can that be accommodated? And what can be done to make that manageable?
Yeah.
Maybe it can't be. We can't do everything. But how we can at least have the conversation.
Yeah.
And, work it out.
Yeah.
And it might be that doing it in the middle of the night is because that's the way your sleep pattern works naturally, or it might be actually tweaking how, what caffeine you drink.
Yeah.
Could just shift that.
Yeah. Or your inspiration.
Yeah.
Your artistic inspiration. Like I find I get more inspired at night, and sometimes trying to, what I was saying before about like managing a kind of work-life balance as an artist is sometimes a 9-to-5 regulated office style work day doesn't really work for artists. And then you can find yourself, if you try to do it that much, you're just descending down a spiral of, you're not actually being creative, you're just kind of constantly tweaking something that doesn't really need tweaked, and is like you're missing out on the bigger picture of what is it that I'm trying to achieve with this work specifically, because maybe it's because we're just trying to frame our artistic practices in this kind of 9-to-5 office-based capitalist, late capitalism mode that we live under already, which we've been told is the way it should be. And as queers, one of our jobs, I think, is to question everything that we're told that this is the way it should be.
Yeah.
Because if it is the way it should be, it will withstand questioning.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's interesting. So there's the 5 aspects of modelling queer utopias. Is there, like, how forward are you along with the individual 5 aspects in, like, planning how that is going to be put into practice?
Yeah, so the year, I think, is probably going to have 5 moments in it that if it was regular times, it might not be, but if it was regular, it might be every 2 months.
Okay.
So if we're in July, we might be looking at something in October, something around Christmas time, something in spring, something in May, something in July again.
Yeah.
That would give us 5 kind of windows. And within those, we're calling them design sprints, programmed bits. So we'll have 10 days where people will converge and create things, parties, presentations, exhibitions, talks, and what have you. And they might be loosely themed around those themes.
Okay.
Or they might be themed around, a part of practice. So I'm interested in an animation one that might be in November. Will it be about animation, or will it be about food and animation? I don't know. It will depend on speaking to potential collaborators, who's available, who's interested, who's got something to say, and so these things will begin to emerge. But the idea is that we'd have 10 days in November where there'll be lots of things for the public to come to. On a day-to-day basis, in the 2 months or 8 weeks or whatever that is in between, we will be living a day-to-day life, the people that are there. And so we'd have some day-to-day things. So Vez, who used to run the venue, is now trained as a yoga teacher, so we might try an 8-week block of yoga that anyone in the building and the community can come to, and we'll just test it out to see if that works. Is it something people want? Is it something people, can Vez sustain herself to some degree as a teacher in that? All questions we don't know. But we've got an 8-week chance to try it. And if it sticks, it sticks. And it might run for several years, or it might stop. But, we've got these blocks with these endpoints.
Okay.
So, we could do some cookery classes, and it could be like every Tuesday is a yoga class. Every Tuesday evening's a cookery class. I don't know. But it's that kind of thing. We could look at music, and you might say, well, I'm interested in developing this part of what I'm doing. Could we get someone in to deliver some Ableton basics, or just an artist that you're really interested in who is queer, maybe has something to say about this stuff, maybe is interested in utopia, ways of living, fantasy ideas, whatever it might be. Do we invite them to come and stay for 2 weeks while they write a track that we then, with the community or on their own, it doesn't matter, and they perform it in the 10-day thing?
Just to dial back, because I don't think this is something that we covered in this talk up to now, is a kind of community aspect where this will also be a space that is at times open to the public. Right, so there is a kind of, for want of a better word, for want of a better term, community service aspect to that.
Absolutely. So like I say, it's on a day-to-day basis, like finding out what's useful for the community. Is it yoga, is it cookery, is it something else? Is it hearing from artists, giving work in progress, or this is who I am? Is it film screenings? What is it?
And just to be very clear for the listeners about that, when we say community, is that the community of people who work and live at Islington Mill, or is that open to a broader community?
We'd want it to be open to a broader community.
Sure.
But there might be instances like if someone's exploring intimacy in a particular way, you might want something that's more closed.
Sure.
It might be to do someone's practice that they have specific collaborators. They come here and they're looking for a textile person or a music person that can produce a track for their animation. So that might be a direct conversation with you. But within that, you might choose to show some films that have amazing soundtracks. And then that film screening night could be open to anybody. It's part of your practice for you and the collaborator to explore those soundtracks, which is why you've created those particular films. But it's likely to be of interest to other people just because it's an interesting film.
Cool, okay.
Or not. Maybe only 2 people turn up. But it's still useful for you. And those 2 people have still come into an environment and met you, seen some interesting films, hung out in the space, begin to feel familiar, hopefully get a sense that they belong.
That seems like, when we were first discussing it just there, it seemed very theoretical, obviously because I was asking you to describe the theories of it, but also it's got a very practical edge as well, a very practical aspect to it. That's really cool. This is really good for me because this is actually clarifying for me as well, because obviously for the listeners, we know each other and we see each other in the mill and we talk about this stuff anyway, but actually to have it laid out like this is like, I can really see it. It's got theoretical aspect, but also very practicable aspect as well, of things that can be set into motion and be done, which is great because up to this point I was only really aware of the more theoretical side of it, and that was something that I wanted to ask you about, is the more practicable side of it. But that sounds really good, and definitely having the community aspect to it, having to have it, it has to be available at certain points for people who've maybe never been here before to come and discover it as well.
And this is how we did the venue. People would come along saying, "Oh, I went to a gig here last night, I really liked it, could I put on a gig?" And you say yes.
Yeah.
And then from that you learn what they're interested in, and then you find that actually we're interested in that too, so should we jointly invite Christina or whoever, and do we make it work? That's the start of collaboration, when you understand who are the people involved, how it works, and what the space is like. So it's modelling it.
Yeah.
Because it's not that we would never do this, but an open call, for example, just like any kind of job interview, people have to put themselves forward in a certain kind of way. And yes, there is some elements of blind assessing to some degree, all of that understood, but at the same time you're not getting to know the person, you're not getting to know the practice. And I always find in those processes, it's like, do we have what that person wants, and are they asking for what they really want, or are they asking what they think we want to hear in order to get the job? So we've tended to be a bit more organic than that, but that means we then have to work really hard on, well, how do people access the space?
Yes.
So that's where kind of meaning that potluck dinner, as I described, if people have got anxiety about coming to something like that, then let's tweak it or change it or find another access point for people that aren't interested in that. But give them those opportunities to have those one-on-one conversations. And myself and Maury have always been that, because we've been living it, and people will be living there. So the aim is that of the 8 bedrooms that we'll have, perhaps 3, 4 or 5 people will be based there, and that they will kind of know what's possible, where things are, how to go about things, and that they'll be, what, as a host, or we started to call it steward, meaning like holding the space. Myself and Maury always made it part of our life to go and stand in the courtyard and speak to people, and out of that find out what people are doing, and then people would say, "Oh, you're the person that can make things happen." It's like, well, so let's make something happen. But it's passing that on, empowering other people that live there to hold those resources, so that everything's not through the team. They're a great team, but allow the team to manage the building, keep it safe, keep it functioning, but creatively, and from a programming point of view, we act as artists, and that we're artist led, and that the resources, like, where's the projector? I want to project a film, that someone knows where that is and can plug it in, so, and that they're empowered to say, yeah, I can do that for you, and show your film, we can do it next Thursday.
Cool.
And constantly exploring, because we won't get it right. And also community. We are a community interest company, but that's got a community of interest in it, which isn't everybody. Yes, we want to broaden it. Yes, we want to diversify it. Yes, we want to get as more people and new generations and more different types of people bringing different perspectives in. And that's why having a venue is really important, because we'd have artists from the States or from Japan or from wherever come, and they bring ways of being and doing with them, and we want to bring that back. So but creating those access points that people can engage with in different ways becomes really important, but we know that it won't suit everybody all the time. But we're an artist studio building, we're a queer led space, so let's start there and use what we learn to diversify from that.
So how did you arrive at the 5 elements then?
Kind of quite a long process of just beginning to explore different communities and how people hold different spaces. In 2015 I was able to go on the Claw Leadership Programme, which has a 2-week residential at the start and end, and so we sat in a lot of circle things with a million post-it notes. I'd never been in a facilitated space before that. I'd never been on a 2-week residential where you focus on something before. I just never had the opportunity. I didn't know they existed, and I went on a lot of them during that year. So I began to think, well, what else is going on that's queer, that I can learn from and develop. And originally I found the Edward Carpenter community that hold like 7-day residentials in the lakes, and it's a bit outdoorsy and what have you. And I was just intrigued how like 40 people can just turn up in a place and co-create what happens over 7 days, where people can propose whatever they want to offer and people pick it up or don't. And I was intrigued because that had been going for 30 years. And it's like, well, they've been doing this for 30 years. And to some degree, kind of seeing what they weren't doing as well. Yeah. But also hearing about other things. So I heard about the radical fairies. Well, I'd heard about the radical fairies, but I met people that went to fairies. So I could begin to say, they'd say it's a bit like this, but it's different in these ways. More queer, less kind of gay men. Yeah. Again, going for a long time. So it's like, well, how have they sustained this? And like the fairies have a much more like kind of non-hierarchical, anarchic, radical approach to how they organise, yet they manage to kind of hold events with 80 people in a really queer and attempting at inclusive and openness to whatever people bring. So what are the things that they're doing? I went to Ayahuasca Retreats, things that are on the edges and the margins of your day-to-day life, and just seeing, what do they bring in order to make it safe? How do they, allow people to go into delicate situations like that and be themselves? What are the foundational things? And, this is where these kind of ideas started to emerge, because, again, it was me seeking out, well, where is queer utopia? And, for some people, you go to fairies and there's often a conversation, we want to live like this all the time because I feel so free, I can be myself. And I'm with other people that want vaguely similar things, and we make it happen. We all cook together. Things happen. How can that be more present in our day-to-day lives? And then here I am in a community where we have a building, we have a place, and we have a community, but maybe it's quite fragmented because people are just in their studios behind their doors, and maybe some people come to potluck, but not everybody. So what can I bring from that might start to make things feel more inclusive, safer, diverse, whatever? And that's when things, began to look at some of these foundational elements and not just choose them like, okay, so let's do more potluck dinners, but like I say, interrogate it, critique it, explore it, listen to people, be prepared to kind of challenge it and change it, but address it rather than leave it. Because in my practice, when I come to the mill, I often forget about food straight away because I'm having a million conversations and all the nice stuff. Yeah. And something like food goes right out the window, and then after 3 days I'm knackered, starving. And
it's a workspace as well. Yeah. Yeah.
But it's going to be a lived space.
Yeah.
So, I can't operate and be here safely for my recovery. I can't be here safely for all those other well-being things if I overwork and don't eat. So if I want to be part of this community like I always wanted to be, I need to start addressing these things for me. And I don't think I've got the right way, which is back to utopias. What works for me might not work for you. And that's when we come to this conversation.
That's interesting as well, because again, it ties back into what I was saying earlier about the work-life balance of being an artist, especially a self-trained artist, where it's this kind of imagined, and sometimes this is the reality, where you're just hit with inspiration and you just want to do it until it's finished right then to get it done. And things like rest and food go out the window because you're dedicated to your artistic practice. And it is very important to find that balance. Like I've had many times here where I've like been working for hours and I'm just like suddenly at the end I'm like, oh my god, I'm so hungry. Like I haven't eaten properly in like 10 hours and stuff. So it is good to address those kind of slightly more mundane things that never really come up when people think about or imagine the life of an artist. But you mentioned before about the Radical Fairies. Yeah. So the Radical Fairies recently have had a residency here at the mill. Yeah. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So that came out of me being. I went to my first gathering in 2019 at Featherstone Castle near Hadrian's Wall. Then we hit COVID, and I went to a lot of things online, which was really nice actually, because it meant I didn't have to kind of go through all the anxieties of packing a bag and getting there and meeting a million people. You could just zoom in, and so that was really nice to just get to know faces a bit more and understand a bit of fairy culture from afar. And then spent last year, I went to 3 different gatherings, and that was a little bit more proactive. Like, I'm there because it's nourishing and it's exciting and it feels like a community and a queer space. Oh yeah, and I'm researching, and they're researching too. They're always exploring how we can do this better, because someone else different does it every time. So that process of kind of putting some basics in place, like someone's got all the pans and the lentils somewhere, we need to get them to wherever they're going to be. But then when you're on the gathering, people that want to cook will cook for the whole thing, and it's decided on an almost daily basis. And those of us like me who aren't confident in cooking will do the washing up, or clear out the compost leaves or whatever else, or perhaps nothing, because we are actually there for just a nourishing chill. But out of the 30 to 80 people, you make those mundane things happen. And that's why this feature space could be not just artists, because someone might come on a cooking residency.
Oh, okay.
And all they're going to do for 2 weeks is cook for the community. And that means that when you're working late while they're there, you might go, oh, I like what they do, I'll go up and see what they've put on today. And that might stop when they go. Or someone might go, oh, that was a great idea, I'll have a go at doing that. And it carries on. And then wouldn't that be great? Great for them to experiment, learn, grow. Great for us as a community to have that. And when they stop doing it, that's always been the life of the mill. We had a great garden when David lived here and made a garden. And then it was taken over by others, and now we're a building site, so it's totally deconstructed. But it's always that, like, try it, see it, work to people's passions, allow people to do what they love and are comfortable with, that ikigai. Maybe the money bit can often be missing because we're in an artist-led culture, but a DIY culture. But, when we're trying to do, as you say, in practice, we're everything. With a producer, with a writer, with a marketeer, with a... and Islington Mills as an organisation is like that. We have very few people to do those things. So, how can we achieve some of those things, but kind of, working with people's passions, but not in an exploitative way, where they're kind of learning and growing on their own terms, and it's their choice. Not like you're coming here to cook for us. It's like, well, if you want to learn something, come and, or if you want to try out running a cookery course because you think that might be part of your income, and you might take that elsewhere, and richer people might pay more for it, and you want a test bed where you can make mistakes and get it wrong, but come and try it. It's the kind of vibe we'd be going for. So after a year, we will have tried some of these things, and we might have some things that have stuck. And we might not. And alongside all of that, we'll be doing our practice. So we might start animations and virtual realities and little projects that different people will propose and get involved in, and then present all of that as an open house in July the following year.
Okay. So presumably at the end of the 12-month period, when you get the keys and you can start this process, at the end of the 12 months after that, there'll be a kind of... what's the word? I'm sure there's an accounting term for this, but where you take stock of everything that's happened and you analyse it and go, right, the last 12 months have been, what have we learned?
Yeah, I mean, take stock and analyse in a very informal way. But we're working with MIF. It's not a commission, but we're talking about talking an open house during the International Festival in July 2023, so that nicely bookends a year. It might be an amazing exhibition with virtual reality and all kinds of crazy shit going on with millions of contributors, or it might just be, here's how we live. And that's why Modelling Queer Utopia could be a specifically curated experience, performance, exhibition, film. Or it could just be, come and hang out and have a cup of tea in our little, wherever we've got to. And hopefully it's transformed, like, literally from a white box that we get the keys for into something more colourful and vibrant and stimulating and interesting and educational. And hopefully we've got some of these patterns of So you come in and say, yeah, we do yoga every Tuesday, come along.
Cool. Or you could also start a new clothing line called Queer Utopias.
Yes.
And you could just get people to come and model it.
Absolutely.
Walking up and down a catwalk.
Exactly. So we could definitely do like, an 8-week thing on identity.
Yeah.
With just us.
Yeah.
Or us in the mill community, or us and the kids outside. It can be as contained or as broad as we feel inclined.
Yeah.
And it might start as just us, and next year it becomes a line, and or it's just about allowing things to grow and gestate and be tested, experimented with, fail, and then see if we feel inclined to do it again or not.
Yes. Maybe what we could also do is record another podcast and see what
where
we've
we're
learned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We could do one at each design sprint.
That's true, actually. I mean, I do want this podcast to be something that serves the community as well as just being interesting chats. And I think one of the importance of doing this and getting you to talk about this today is to have a document of it so that people can go and reference that and know what is going on. And I think that is an important function of having a podcast that is based in Islington Mill. It's being able to impart to the residents and also just the people who are interested, the general artistic community, people who know about Islington Mill, people who have been here before but haven't been in a while because it's not a venue at the moment, etc. Just a resource where they can come and hear about what's actually happening.
Yeah, and it's like, a lot of that stuff, what's happening, will appear on our website and stuff like that. But people might be going, but where's the open call? How do I get involved? So what's the access point? And maybe they listen to this podcast and go, oh, that's how it works. I turn up to yoga and get to have a chat with somebody, and then I just see how it pans out. Yeah. And, other ways we might do it more formally, because we might put a call out, we're looking for a queer animator / cook.
/model.
/model.